seen this?
So welcome to Why Haven't You Seen This with me, Emily Barton. On this episode, I'm joined by my really good friend Leslie Conroy, actor, writer and general all-round legend. Jazz gal pal. And we're going to chat about Cinema Paradiso. This was your pick, Leslie, and I'm really excited that you chose this because this has been on my list for a really long time.
Excellent.
And I hadn't seen it.
Yeah, I can't believe you, of all people, have not seen this movie.
I know. It's kind of embarrassing to admit it.
Yeah.
I was like, you were going, why haven't you seen this, Emily?
Exactly. It's actually now my show, so it's Leslie Conroy's Why Haven't You Seen This? There you go.
Over to you, girl. Take it. Take it.
No, you're welcome to it.
So why did you choose Cinema Paradiso, first of all, before we kind of give a quick background into it? What is it about this film that you're like, we need to talk about this?
That is such a good question, because when I knew you were going to do the show and I was saying it was the only movie, I was like, we have to talk about this movie. And then I was like, well, why? I mean, what is it about this movie? I haven't seen it in like 15 years. It's not one of those movies I rewatch again and again and again. And so I watched it again to say, okay, well, why did you pick this movie? And it's just such a gorgeous movie. It's a song. It's a song. It's a celebration. It's a love story of cinema, of storytelling, of ambition, of opportunity, of how life is such a strange mystery. And because I was on the car here today, I was thinking, like, what if Toto had gotten a job in a chemist, or what if Toto had become the fisherman's apprentice? How different his life would have been. So
it's so fascinating though, isn't it? Yeah, where life takes people.
Yeah,
I have to say, for me, it was, I knew it was a great film. I had heard of it. It was on my list for like a really, 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 really long time, and I don't know what it was. This was obviously the perfect opportunity to actually get me sit down and watch it. I think probably guiltily, as much as I like foreign film, I'm very slow to sit down and watch a foreign film because there's so many other movies that are not in another language, and it's really lazy on my part. But when I do sit down and watch them, I love them. And and recently, you know, I've become obsessed with Bong Joon-ho since he did Snowpiercer and Making a Murder, and obviously he's done really, really well with Parasite. But I had heard of him before Parasite kind of went global. But with Cinema Paradiso, all of the accolades that it's received, so it came out in 1988, it won a huge amount of BAFTAs, it won Oscar for Best Foreign Film, it won a load of Golden Globes. It deserves its accolades. It's a really, really beautiful film. So I knew I'd enjoy it, but I didn't realise it was going to be as funny as it was. I didn't realise it was going to be, like, I knew it was a love story to film and a love story about film, but I just didn't know it was going to be as cute and charming and endearing, and I just didn't think it was going to be as clever. And the way the scenes are shot and the cuts in it are absolutely amazing. So just for people who haven't seen Cinema Paradiso, and if you haven't seen Cinema Paradiso like I hadn't, what is wrong with you? Watch Cinema Paradiso, it's so good. No, it was directed by Giuseppe Tornatore. I hope I'm pronouncing that correct. I suppose another selling point is Ennio Morricone did the music for it, and the music is its own.
so beautiful.
It's its own actor in it. It's its own part, isn't it?
And when we were going to do this, like, we'd planned to do this ages ago, he had just died.
I know.
So that was like so weird. It was the timing.
Yeah, that was very, very, very strange timing, and I'm very, very sad because, like, what an amazing talent! Like, what he's left us with all the amazing musical scores. So it was directed by Giuseppe. Ennio Morricone did the music, and it's set in Sicily during the 1950s, and it follows really the focus is around this young guy Salvatore, or Toto.
Toto, the most adorable child in the world.
He's literally the cutest child I have ever seen, ever. So it's about Toto. So in the film, he's about what? He's about seven, eight.
Like, what casting? I mean, how could you get a child? Look, there's his face on the cover of the DVD. I just adore him.
He's gorgeous. He's so cute. So it's about Salvatore. He's in this very small Sicilian town, and his mother, during the 1950s, his father has been away at war for a long time, no sign of him, and it's really about his relationship with the local cinema projectionist called Alfredo.
Alfredo.
And the relationship between the two of them in the 1950s. And of course, Toto is totally obsessed with the movies and is always there and is always bothering Alfredo. And he's a real annoying.
Yeah.
He really annoys him, but there's this sort of, he's almost like his father figure as well, and his best friend.
Smart, isn't it? Yeah, how that's weaved in, and he's there for him, and it's this place of refuge in a strange time. I imagine the 50s, it must have been really tough.
Really tough, yeah.
And Sicily, like, what was there to do?
In this tiny village with this big town square, like the cinema's in the centre of it. So the cinema is the cinema's the main character. The cinema Paradiso is the main character in it. And it's what I love about it as well. Anything that's based on any kind of true from real life experience always ends up being amazing. And apparently Giuseppe, this town is based on his hometown.
I didn't know
and
that.
It's based on his real life experiences. Now I don't know if there was an Alfredo or but it was for him, it was a love letter to cinema. Now I suppose in the modern age, like, a great thing is there's so much content, and we've Netflix and we've Hulu and we have Amazon, and we can watch movies on our phone, and it's a real struggle for cinemas to keep people coming in. Now movie lovers like us will always go to the cinema because the experience of sitting in a movie theater is the magic, but for him it was a total love story and commentary on just the magic of the theater. And this film for me was it was so cute. So you've this beautiful little Sicilian town square. It's the 1950s. There's a lot of poverty in the town. There's a small commentary on, there's some people who are not well off. There's quite a lot of people who are illiterate, and then you've got sort of people in the town who are maybe working class, and in the cinema you've got them sitting up in the balcony.
So clever.
And then the people sort of poor people are sitting downstairs. And the other characters, like there's just the villagers, for me, made me feel the nostalgia. So you've got this story of Toto and Alfredo in the cinema, and all of this, going in and out, and the picture screenings every day, and then all of the villagers coming in. So it's the variety of characters that you get.
Because you've got the director's cut there.
I have the director's cut.
Because I think over the years I've gone between the director's cut and the normal cut and the director's cut. Like, it's so rich. Like, I remember there's one scene in particular where there's a very close encounter with a couple, and I must have been quite young when I watched it. I was like, oh my god. But it really was like, it was a microcosm of the village, wasn't it? Everyone was there, how they grew up in the cinema, I guess it really was just a place of refuge, though. It was a place for everyone to be together. And yes, there was the divide, and upstairs, downstairs almost.
But everyone came together in the cinema.
Everyone came together. And there's a scene at the end when he comes back, and it's very clever storytelling, because a lesser director would have given us so at the end he comes back, our friend Toto, but he comes back to the ruin of the cinema. And a lesser filmmaker would have shown little flashbacks to the characters sitting in the seats. But he doesn't. He just shows the desert that's there. And then we fill in the pictures. And then we remember our favourite characters or our favourite moments. Was there a guy who was always asleep? And they used to put things in his mouth.
He'd get really annoyed when he'd come in and the cinema would be jammers because there'd be a new release, and he'd be like, this is where I come to sleep.
Totally. Emily, I remember when I used to go, years ago, I used to go to New York, and we'd be out all night, and we'd be in hotels. I can't remember what the situation was, but during the day, because we were out all night, there were two options to sleep during the day. You either slept on a train, you hopped on a train, and you would go all the way out to like Rochester or Westchester, and then you'd come back and you'd just be asleep, or you'd go to the cinema to get a couple of hours sleep during the day. This is what we did.
That's amazing.
I know, you just buy some trashy ticket to some trashy release in New York, and then you just have
so you could totally relate to that character.
He was me. It was like, art imitating life. Totally.
It was just so good. So like the film opens, and I love the way the film opens with Toto, and honestly I think it's the cutest child to ever be in a film. And he's an altar boy, and the priest, of course, plays a really big role in this, and I love the way they play out the priest role. But Toto is up at the altar while the priest is saying mass, and he's sort of asleep on his hand, and the priest is doing the sacraments and he's waiting for the bells to ring, and Toto is just like fast asleep and he's sort of going and it's just such a lovely introduction to it. And it's also really clever because you're opening with the priest, and then very soon it's going from the priest saying mass to the priest going into the cinema to watch the film before public release,
the censor
all the kissing scenes or the women showing their bosoms or anything like that. And Alfredo is up in the projectionist room having to cut the sections where he sort of rings a bell to say, nope, that's cut, that's coming out, coming out.
So then you've got the bell from the church to art.
Maybe Toto falling asleep during the sacrament when he had to ring the bell was a sort of a subconscious protest.
There you go.
Yeah. Or I'm just probably reading into it.
No, I like it. We've got a little essay going on here.
But it was brilliant. Like, you know, so he'd be ringing the bells and he'd be cutting them out, and then Toto would want the cut film. And then, of course, the film back in those days, you know, it was highly flammable, so you had to be really careful, and they'd paper everywhere. The way that he cuts the scenes from one thing to the next is just, I think, is so beautiful. Yeah. You know, they're really clever cuts and quick cuts. Like, there's a scene where when he's a little bit older and he's a teenager and he's fallen in love with this girl, and the girl's father isn't a fan of him. They're driving along the country road and his car breaks down. His car, of course, is an absolute heap of metal, and it breaks down, and a car comes along and it's her father, and he's like, oh Lord. And so the father just gets out of the car and walks towards them. And then it just cuts to a completely different scene with Toto's in the cinema and he's chatting to Alfredo, but Toto happens to have a bruise on his face.
Yes,
you know what I mean? Like, there's all of these kind of cuts where it's sort of it insinuates something that's happened, but it doesn't actually show it.
That's so true. That was smart.
And they're really quick and really, really smart. So what for you is like, what would be your favourite part of this film? Or like, is there a scene that stands out for you, or is it or a character that you really love? Or
Alfredo, he's just wisdom, you know. He's and I love that. I'm going to start crying, but and it's so like Ireland and rural Ireland, and there's just such great heart in rural Ireland that I'm not sure is as accessible in cities. I think we just get so bogged down by getting ahead and doing well and just city living. There's a simplicity, and I don't want to underestimate or undermine country living, but there's a simplicity in the country, and there's a heart in the country, and a wisdom and a clarity, and I think that's Alfredo and the advice he gives him, and along the way. I do think the first third of the movie, or the first half, is my favourite. Because it's Toto and Alfredo, it's their relationship, it's so beautiful, and it's not easy, and I love that. And because my Wexford granddad was such a messer, and there's such great stories about him, but he was always quite formidable, but with a little grin. and Alfredo has that. It's that cheeky, I'm pretending to be angry with you now, but I can't because you're just too adorable. And
he does get away. Toto gets away with murder, and Alfredo gets him out of every. Because like, there's a couple of instances where I'm like, that little fecker, you know. But Alfredo always seems to be there for him. But then, but what I love about that is you have all these scenes where Alfredo is he's always there for him, even though he's kind of, you know, give him a kick up the arse or something. And then there's a scene where the kids are doing the school exam.
Oh, that's
and
brilliant.
you have Alfredo and like 3 or 4 of the other villagers, and these are men in their 40s, 50s, 60s who are illiterate, and they're trying to get their school certificate. And Alfredo is sitting there and he's really struggling with his paper. And I also love the attention to detail in this film, because it's in the 1950s, and they're obviously using ink and ink cartridges, and you can see the ink all over their hands. Brilliant. All of them at their desks. And Alfredo's there kind of going tss, tss, to Toto, trying to get his attention, and Toto's kind of, you know, blocking his page, and you're like, for God's sake, like, Alfredo is so good to you, you know, he's always looking after her. And Toto's of course naturally very clever, and Alfredo is looking for help with a couple of the questions, and just without any words, the interaction between them is so funny. And again, I'm the same as you. I love the first third of the film. I mean, the young Salvatore, the young Toto, he's just so adorable, but the interaction between him and Alfredo is the most beautiful.
Definitely.
Like, all of those scenes are just so beautiful, and the cuteness of Salvatore and the cheekiness of him just really, it makes me emotional. It really warms your cockles. I mean, as soon as I started watching it, I just immediately loved it because of that interaction between the two of them. And Alfredo is just, he's always there for him no matter what happens. And it's tough as well because Toto is in this village where, you know, there's a lot of hardship going on, and his father is completely absent, and he doesn't even know what's happening with his father. And then I think he starts to kind of suspect, look, he's probably dead. The reason my father hasn't come back since the war is because he's probably dead, but they haven't had word. I loved how they had there's all these kind of subtleties that are going on, where Alfredo, I think at one point, mentions that his father reminded him of Clark Gable. Toto's father reminded of Clark Gable. And then sort of slightly later in the film, they get the telegram to say the father had died, and the mother goes to pick up her, I don't know, widow's pension. And as they're walking back through rubble, they see a Gone with the Wind poster on the wall, and Salvatore looks up at it and he kind of smiles. And it was just that subtlety, because I had to kind of go back and like it was only just I had remembered, it just so happened that I had remembered that he'd mentioned his father was like Clark Gable. So that moment where he's walking back, having found out that his father's died, and then seeing that Gone with the Wind poster, like it was so, that subtlety is so beautiful, and there's so much like that throughout the film.
It's so smart though, and how it uses the movies as a progression of time. You know, we go through the decades, suddenly we're in the 50s, things start to get a bit racier, we're in the 60s, it's like morals are going out the window, it's a new world. And then we see Toto as he gets older as well, like they go hand in hand. And
the way the influence changed, because like in the original cinema, the priest is sort of the boss, and he's dictating, you know, he's doing the censorship of all the film, albeit he's quite a kind of a lovable character.
He's adorable,
isn't he?
Especially when I saw it, I watched it quickly this morning again, and there's a scene where he's saying goodbye.
Oh no, yeah.
And it's like there was such fondness, you know, and it's that love-hate. I love you, but I hate you, and you're a pest, but I love you, but I have to pretend to hate you. Just
the warmth,
smart. Yeah, there is that warmth.
But I love that progression where so you have the priest who's, you know, through the decades, where you have the priest who's sort of running the show, and then because of the flammable film, the cinema burns down, and then one of the local residents,
the Neapolitan
wins the local kind of lotto. He rebuilds the cinema. It's it's a beautiful, obviously updated modern version, but because he's
in charge,
the priest doesn't have as much as a say, and you then see all sorts of things unfolding in the cinema.
Oh yeah. And wasn't there a scene where there was a movie and not enough of them could go in?
That was gorgeous.
And then the Neapolitan, who was just a humble dude and happened to win the pools, he sees this, and is it him or was it? No, it was Alfredo. Alfredo turns the projection, or there's a mirror or something, I can't remember what he does.
He uses the light off or the window or something, so that the projector that's facing into the cinema, he's also getting back projection or something out the window, and he moves it in such a way so that the projection on the wall goes out the window, out into the square and onto one of the sides of the houses, so the people who are outside roaring to get in to see the film get to sit out in the square and watch the film.
Just his generosity, just Alfredo's heart is the heart of the movie. And then of course we have the scene where there's the fire and Alfredo loses his sight, and then he becomes almost like this mythical Greek. He's the blind man, the blind wise man. Our friend Toto saves his life.
I know, this teeny tiny little 7-year-old pulling this big hefty man down these stairs is just incredible.
But it's great. It's great because you do, like, if people go the extra mile for you, you'll do it for them.
Yeah.
And it changed his life. I mean, sometimes I think, you know, if he'd chosen a different path, if Toto had chosen a different path in his life, would he have been happy? You know.
Yeah, I was really torn about Salvatore's life, because Alfredo obviously pushed him away, because Alfredo wanted him to go and pursue his dreams, but to really make something of himself, and he knew he was smart and he knew he could do it, and he didn't want him to sort of, I guess, in inverted commas, waste his life staying in the village, being the village projectionist, and he wanted him to kind of fulfill those dreams. There's this lovely love story that ensues throughout the film, but I was really conflicted about it, because he goes off and he becomes this success, this massive success, but he doesn't seem happy, and then he's lost out on all this time with Alfredo
and his own family
and you know, even the way it ends. So because I know a lot of people sort of, oh, it's so beautiful the way it ends, but the ending was bittersweet for me, because he has this moment where Alfredo has left him all of the cuts of all the kisses from, you know,
which gets me every time.
It's just so beautiful. But part of me was like, "Feck you, Alfredo," because I was like, you know, you pushed him away, you made him leave. He missed out on all the time with his family, and ultimately he's sitting there having just been told he's won all these awards for films that he's made, and he's like this big film director and he's this massive success, but he just doesn't seem happy.
Yeah, there's an emptiness there.
And it's almost like, you know, Alfredo, you know, pushed him from love, but really kind of pushed him in such a way that he was like, you have to go, but you can never come back, and you have to like go down this route, and didn't really give Salvatore much option. And Salvatore did it, and he fulfilled Alfredo's dream, maybe, because Alfredo was never able to do that for himself. Like, he was illiterate until later in life, and then he was blinded, so it was almost like Salvatore went and fulfilled Alfredo's dreams for him. But Salvatore doesn't seem that happy in the end. And that for me was something that kind of, him watching all the kissing scenes was so bittersweet.
And like, what was that? Like, what was the message behind the kissing scenes? Do you know? Like, so it's fabulous. Like, he's kept all the kisses that he'd cut out, and he pulls them all together in this reel. But it reminds me of just all the people who would have had to leave Ireland in the 50s. My own family, and they went, you know, a lot of them just went to England, but always there was that deep longing for where they came from. So yes, they went on, they were very successful, they did everything they could for the kids, for better life for them, but there was just this hole, you know, and you can't go back to. And when they do come back, but then again, you know, it's always different. You can't argue with progression. You can't argue with... And it's something he says, actually. It's something Alfredo says to him is, don't be nostalgic. Don't give in to the nostalgia. If you come back, I won't let you in. He says that to... Or Alfredo says that to Toto.
And what do you think? Is that sort of... He's protecting him? Because, like, I think we all get nostalgic about the past. And yet we can never relive the past because it's in the past. And if you go back to somewhere, it's changed every time, or your experience is going to be different every time, so it's never going to be the same. So he's trying to protect him from the disappointment. But I just feel like nostalgia is so important, because it also gives you so much joy. I mean, this film made me think of, I've lived in Dún Laoghaire my entire life, and the first films I went to see, there was no cinema in Dún Laoghaire, but there was a small cinema in Sandy Cove, Glasgow, called the Forum, and I saw all of my films there, and it was a real old school cinema.
What was the first movie you saw? Oh my goodness! You remember?
Oh, you're putting me on the spot now. I don't know if I can remember the first. I have a vivid memory of going to see Sense and Sensibility.
Oh my god!
I remember, and I loved the Roundtrees. They were boxes of sweets. They were little boxes of sweets as opposed to bags of sweets. You get little square boxes, and when you went into the Forum Cinema, the floor went down, and scooped up.
Oh wow!
Like, so it was just and it was proper, like, old school, like red velvet curtains.
So was that like
seats.
A purpose-built cinema, or would it have been like a variety hall over the years?
I don't know, actually. I don't know. It might have been. I think it was built as a cinema, and I just loved it. It was my favourite place to go. Like, it's all I wanted to do. And then a couple of years ago, no, it's a good few years ago now. A couple of years ago, probably a few more than a couple of years ago, they knocked it down and they built apartments in a centre where it was. And now, but they built a cinema in Dún Laoghaire, but it's not the same. No. And the cineplexes are amazing, and they're great for the big effects and great sound effects and visual effects and all the rest of it. But Cinema Paradiso made me nostalgic for that old school cinema experience. But you know, if they brought it back, it's never going to be the same.
And you'd be giving out. You'd be like, oh, the chairs are too uncomfortable, and like, I don't know. Do you remember where the little ashtrays?
Yes, yeah. It used to stink of smoke in the cinema.
It was disgusting.
Yeah,
because we were so lucky in Cork. Like, I would have grown up in Cork. All the theatres were cinemas as well. So we would have had the Palace and the Capitol. Oh God, was there a Tivoli and the Lee. And they all had like a genre. you know, they'd all have a particular style. One you'd go to if you were an older man. And one you would go to if you were a child, going to, you know, watch cartoons. One you'd go to might play a bit more art housey. There was millions of them. And then one by one, like probably around that time, 88. Like I remember seeing Reservoir Dogs in the Capitol. No, the Savoy. The Savoy Theatre in Cork, which is now a mall. You know, it's like a supermarket, a shopping centre. But like I remember seeing Pulp Fiction in the Screen. That's now gone in Dublin.
Yeah.
I remember seeing Schindler's List in the Savoy in Dublin, and there was an interval, and you'd go out and you'd, like, I remember these things vividly. I remember seeing Seven in the Savoy, and there was about 7 of us in the audience in that huge big #1 cinema. But it's becoming so homogenized. It's becoming so homogenized, just how we consume.
Yeah.
How we consume. And cinemas are memories, like movies are memories. And I've been thinking a lot about this actually, and it's how we find our tribes. I mean, you'll go to a party and you'll talk to somebody and you'll say, oh, you know, you might get talking about movies, and if they're talking about blockbusters and like really awful films that you're not into, you'll excuse yourself, and you'll find somebody else who loves Tarantino or whoever you love, and suddenly a friendship is made.
You do. It's such a natural bonding, isn't it? And that you have that in this film. You have the whole community, regardless of whether they're illiterate or not. And actually, the guys who are illiterate, anytime there was words on the screen, they're like, what's it say? That's, you know, right. But it brought everybody together. And the cinema does, it's an equalizer. When you go into a cinema, you're there with every, you know, and I suppose now it's nice in that, you know, you don't have the 2 tiers, you know, where you have people up in the balcony. You don't, you know, it's an equalizer, and that's what I love. I mean, I'll watch movies back to back on my own happily, but when you're watching it with friends or with a partner, and you're able to react with each other to what's happening on the screen, and then you're in the cinema, and you know, you're watching a comedy and everybody's laughing together, and it's that sort of brings you all together in this, you know, you're sharing a moment. Like that's, you know, that's the magic of it, and it's just it just brings all of that. I mean, it's a kind of film really that everybody can relate to, unless you just aren't a cinema goer and aren't into film, in which case you won't be listening to this podcast.
But did you find I found it a bit dated, I have to say. It looked a little bit hokey, and I know it's a beautifully made film and it's really well made, but just the 15-year gap, just it made me see how dated it was a little bit.
It was a little bit. I think they, you know, I would say probably most people would say the first third of the film is the best, and the set and how it's shot, I think it's, for me, it's perfect. You know, you do get a sense of it's set in the 50s. I totally agree with you. I feel like as the film kind of goes on, it is a little bit dated, it is a little bit hokey, and you know, even the director himself had said how the older Salvatore, you know, 30 years later looked absolutely nothing like the child or teenage Salvatore, and he admitted, he was like, yeah, they're look like completely different people, which is not great, you know. And that those later years, you know, it's a real sort of, it's closing that chapter, you know. Even when he goes back and the cinema Paradiso is completely, it's just gone. It's, you know, and I can relate to that. Like I remember when Forum was closed down, and he's going in and it's just rubble, and the seats are falling down, and it's cobwebby and dirty and dusty, and you know it's going to be, but it is ultimately bulldozed, and it's probably going to be a, you know, the paved paradise to put up a parking lot. Story of our lives. You know, it's just that the way it closes it's pretty depressing actually. It's actually kind of a downer at towards the end of the film. I won't lie, you know. It is the first part of the movie is just absolutely gorgeous, but it's kind of well rounded, and that the nostalgia piece, I think, is something that everybody will relate to on some level. Like I do love there are institutions now who are trying to revive the old school, like even the Stella Cinema and Rathmines. I love it. Like it's not the same, it's totally modernized.
Oh god, do you remember the old Stella? It was disgusting. Like your feet would stick. Like
don't miss that.
It was so smelly as well. But yeah,
it's just going to that, because you can go to a Cineplex or an Omniplex and it's lovely, you could still have your movie going experience, shared experience, but you go to somewhere like the Stella where there is a little bit of more romanticism, it's a bit more of an experience, and they charge you for the pleasure. But you know, they've restored this it's beautiful. Like architecturally, it's
yeah.
gorgeous. Like you feel like it's a special place.
Yeah.
You know, because it was restored. And you know, and you have that luxury experience of you have your own big red leather armchair, and you can bring your cocktails into your seat, and you can get food brought into you, and it's sort of the luxury cinema experience.
It's like post Celtic Tiger. It's like we're just ridiculous here now. Come on.
But isn't that like? But it's smart because it's sort of, you know, how can we reinvent the cinema experience to keep people coming, to keep it special? Like once upon a time, like people didn't have TVs, they didn't have phones. You know, so going to a hall with a screen together was the only way that you were going to consume film. Mm-hmm. Whereas now we can watch it on our, you know, 60-inch flat screen TVs, we can watch it on our tablets, we can watch it on our phones.
But how many of them do you remember? Like how many of those experiences?
Not many, but because you're watching, and you can watch so many at a high volume. But when you go to the cinema, but it's funny because Kevin and I just had that conversation where we were like, you know, what was the last film that we went to see? Like we were talking about the Stella, because we go to the Stella as our treat. Like that's, and we look forward to it. We do the whole shebang. We go upstairs to the cocktail room. We have big cocktails. And we were saying, like the last, like, we remember every film that we saw on the Stella because it's an experience. Whereas I totally agree with you. You can watch loads of stuff on Netflix and you'll forget. Like I find that myself. People are like, "What did you watch recently on Netflix?" I'm like, I can't remember, because I've watched actually quite a lot. I consume far too much myself on Netflix or on other stuff, and I easily forget unless I'm in the middle of it. It comes automatic,
doesn't it?
Yeah.
And mindless, and we need to be careful of that, I think.
Yeah.
And as storytellers, as filmmakers, we need to be careful of that.
100%. And I think but I love that there are people out there who are trying to work out how do we make the cinema going experience. And I know, like, down the technology route, you know, there'll be 3D, like we have 3D, but there'll be sort of virtual interactive cinemas and things like that. I don't know how I feel about that. I still just like sitting and watching myself, you know. But I even loved the interaction of the old Harold Cross cinema, and they used to do Rocky Horror Picture Show.
You know, in all my years I was like, I'll go up next Friday. I never did it.
I did it once, but before it closed. I was getting to that age where I was old enough to go to see it, but I think it was due to close down fairly soon, and there was Rocky Horror Picture Shows on every night almost, or every weekend at midnight, and we went along. We bought our bag of tricks, and you'd pay your price at the cinema, and then they give you this random bag of tricks. And I was like, what's this, for an extra $5 or something? I was like, what's the bag of tricks? And I started to realise the interaction. So you had actors on the top of the screen acting out the characters as the film was going. And of course, everyone who's there had seen Rocky Horror Picture Show. So it didn't matter that your attention wasn't fully on the screen the whole time. So you had Frankenfurter and Janice and all of them in front of the screen.
Wow.
Acting it out. And then you had this bag of tricks where the scene where it's raining and the car is broken down and they're walking up to the mansion and it's pissing rain and they've newspapers over their heads. Everybody had a squirt gun, so everyone started like,
we have
shooting
to bring
each other with
back.
squirt guns.
Emily, we have to get it back.
And then there was a scene where Frankenfurter does a toast before eating a meal or something. He says a toast, and there's dried toast in the bags. Everyone throws the toast up in the air. So it's just, you know what I mean, like that interaction and the participative kind of side of it was just so much fun.
We don't need digital, we don't need technology, just give us a bag of props. Seriously.
Exactly, so much fun. So yeah, I think it's interesting. So this was made in 1988, and it was saying something about that, because it, you know, like everything in life, things move on, things change, you know. And it's funny how as humans we have this innate ability to be nostalgic and are almost, you know, kind of rebel against things moving and changing. But I think at the same time we're able to identify, like, where is the magic of the human experience. And I think for a lot of people it's you know, going to the cinema experience. So like you can have, you know, 4D high tech 4K screens and all the rest of it going on, and it's cool. But
I know, and really it's all about storytelling as well. I mean, I'm like, give me a really badly shot piece of, you know, done on a phone, but if the story and if the acting is good, and if I'm swept away with it, and it's mad because even you know, sometimes I think, is it the community of going to the theatre, or the cinema, is it the community of the people you're with? But I remember films that I went to by myself, like maybe between lectures or after college, that really stay with me. I think it's just the fact that you buy a ticket, you're given a seat, and it's time for you. It's time you pair out of your day. Because I think even sitting at home is hard because you're on the phone, you know, you're not giving it the time that you do in the cinema.
There was a scene sort of later in the film that I wanted to touch upon, because I've talked about some of the cutaways, and I think it's one of those subtle, it highlights sort of the mastery of the director and the way this film is shot, because just in its subtlety, the emotion that's built up in it. So Salvatore's been away for 30 years and he's come back for Alfredo's funeral, and his mother hasn't seen him in 30 years, which just breaks my heart. And you can see, and she's even, you know, in many ways you can see her heart's broken, but she's would never make him feel bad about it, which is just makes her even more amazing. But you see her as an old woman sitting in her chair and she's knitting away, and the doorbell goes, and you know it's Salvatore and she hasn't seen him in 30 years. But what the director does in a modern movie, or in many movies, the camera will follow her. She might be running to the door and opening the door, and you see the two embrace. This director doesn't do that, despite the fact that you've got this 30 years of mother and son not seeing each other. When she gets up to go to answer the door, the camera stays on the fact that she's gotten up with her knitting, and what she's knitting she's left on her chair. So she walks away and you just see the thread going with her. Beautiful. And he just zones in on the item that she was knitting and it unraveling. And then the camera just keeps moving and it goes out the window, and you just see mother and son downstairs at the door embracing. I just thought that was amazing.
So clever.
Like what brain thinks like that?
The symbolism.
It's incredible.
And there's another one. He's so smart, and it was only on second time around. Like Sicily as a backdrop is a character as well. It's so beautiful. But there's a scene, he goes to this place by the water, and it's full of old anchors, rusty old anchors. And there's even a little clip from Ulysses. So there's all these other like stories that are entwined. But he goes there when he's at a loss, and he goes there with Alfredo, and basically Alfredo is saying, just go, you know, don't come back. And the beautiful thing that he says, and I think this is the heart of the film for me, he says, whatever you end up doing, love it the way you loved The Projectionist when you were a kid. And that's why he made this film, because it's a love letter to film. It's a love letter to passion. And it's a love letter to following your dreams.
Love that.
Yeah.
So gorgeous.
But there's always a price, Emily. There's always a price.
There's always a price. And look, and nothing in life is simple and straightforward anyway. There's always going to be something that gives, but you know, that passion and that warmth, and you know, it's the passion that sort of feeds you and really kind of builds you up, doesn't it? It just fills you up.
Time.
It's just such a gorgeous film. Cinema Paradiso, it's on every 1001 movies to watch before you die list, or top movies to watch before you die. It really is a film that everybody should see. So like me, if you hadn't seen it, I'm hoping that people will check it out on the back of our chat. If there was any parting thoughts on Cinema Paradiso for you, Leslie?
Whatever you do, love it with all your heart.
You can't do better than that. This film will make you laugh, it'll make you cry, it'll fill you up, it'll depress you. I won't depress you. It'll make you feel very nostalgic, it'll make you feel warm and fuzzy.
It'll make you want to go on holidays to
Italy.
Sicily.
It'll make you want to go to Sicily. Hopefully it'll people want to check it out, because it is. I'm so glad that you suggested this. I'm so glad that I watched it. It's brought all that love and passion that I have for film, and brought it right up to the surface, and I was bursting through the seams with it. So thanks, Leslie.
You're welcome. Thanks for watching.
Why, oh why haven't you seen this? Why, oh why haven't you seen this?